some sort of indication.
Sounds good. Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I hit record. We were not done talking. That's my fault. Let's just transition right into this podcast because it's already off the rails. The program's changed significantly in the last, 24 hours. I'm at Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show. And we're doing this on a Wednesday afternoon because, Jordan Burch of South Carolina just transferred to Oregon, or I should say announced his commitment to Oregon. That is a massive get for Oregon. I'm not exactly sure where he fits all time just from a player perspective, but he was like a top 10 player a couple years ago in the 2020 recruiting class. Significant upgrade there. 5-star transfer. Casey Rogers, another defensive lineman, has also announced he's coming back for another season for the Oregon Ducks. He made maybe that game-saving tackle in the Holiday Bowl against North Carolina. That's significant. And we also have Cam McCormick in a surprise move. Everyone expected him, much like Travis Dye last year. Everyone just expected he'd be back. Either he'd be at Oregon or he'd be off to the NFL or whatever is next for him. He's entered the transfer portal. Let's start here with McCormick because now Oregon only has 3 tight ends on its scholarship on its roster, which puts Oregon in a strange bind next season.
Yeah, it is weird. And just to reflect on Cam's decision, I too was surprised. He made it very clear the last time we spoke to him on record, which was about a week or two before. It was our last media availability in Eugene before the bowl game. I can't pinpoint the date, but a week or two before the bowl. And he indicated he was kind of conflicted, but probably leaning towards considering playing another year. And I think that implication of that was that year would be at Oregon. Was completely off my radar that he would transfer to another school. And just wanted to say what a career he's had. I mean, an all-time strange career, but the fact that he was able to come back, make contributions in a really positive way this year after having missed a good part of genuinely a normal person's entire playing career. He missed that much time basically with injuries, various injuries. What a bizarre career he had. Certainly somebody I think you have to be rooting for wherever they land. I think that's, so much now in this transfer portal era, we talk about, the old refrain is once a duck, always a duck. And I think it's harder now than ever to really kind of stand by that refrain, with a guy's coming in for a year, barely play, transfer. There's so much turnover. A guy like McCormick, I think, for the fan base will always be kind of held in that esteem. He spent 7 years here and gave the program a lot, including his best years physically. And really, you think about the way his body was beaten up, that's something else. But to the second point, Matt, and to the more important one, if you're looking at the 2023 season for Oregon is, well, how aggressive do you become now in the portal or with prep recruits trying to find tight ends? And why I think this is interesting is, we mentioned on our Monday podcast, there was a question about Nicholas Harbor, who's going to be recruited as a tight end. Oregon very much in the picture there. I wonder, if you best case scenario you land him, are you still active in trying to find another scholarship tight end? Do you need to get to 5? Are you okay with 4? You look at this last year's team, and they utilized 4. Terrell Tillman was also there, but never played. And they seem like they were fine, but if you're going to say you're going to rely on 4, it's a different kind of 4, because this past year's 4 were all guys, for the most part, who had some playing experience. There's some injuries there, but you'd be relying on Kenyon Sadiq, a true freshman, and Nicholas Harbor, who's also a true freshman, along with 2 veteran guys in Ferguson and Herbert. So I don't know if you are comfortable doing that. And that also is the assumption that Nicholas Harbor commits to Oregon, which is an assumption that I don't think we're comfortable making it because it's not as clear cut. Like we talked on Monday. There's a question asked about, okay, who do you feel the best about between Evan Williams, Jordan Burch, and Nicholas Harbor? And we were all kind of like, the portal guys we feel really good about. There's enough kind of smoke behind the scene that there's going to be a lot of positivity there. And, I think it even exceeded our expectations that they landed both those guys within 72 hours, 48 hours of that podcast. But Harbor, to me, I have no idea if that's an Oregon commit or not. It seems like there's some positive momentum, but that feels now like a super big priority for the staff to wrap that recruitment up, land him, and then now you've got 4 guys. And if you miss there, you definitely are taking maybe 2 players in the portal, I would think, or for sure 1. You can't play with 3 scholarship tight ends, especially because Sadiq. Sorry to linger here a little bit because I know we're making this podcast sort of short. And I don't want to be the only one talking. But Sadiq is like 6'3", 220. He's not he's a hybrid athlete anyway, so he's not going to be necessarily the same type of player who can fill in and play the inline position at the same level.
I'll just start by saying I was surprised that Cam left. He'll be going wherever his next venture is for his 8th and 9th year of eligibility. I just felt like if he was going to play another season, it would probably be his last one at Oregon. I don't know what the sole purpose is of going for 8 and 9 years of college eligibility to play football is, but
it's a lot.
At that point, it just never felt like he would leave Oregon. But yeah, no, he decided to transfer, and that's good for him. And wherever he'll go, hopefully he stays healthy and he can produce. To go on to the scholarship thing, I'll make it kind of short and simple here. The guys that Oregon has lost are significantly different body types than what they anticipate bringing in, and that's to the point that Erik was just making. Nicholas Harbor is a big guy, but he's 6'4", 6'5", 225 pounds. Kenyon Sadiq, like Erik mentioned, 6'3", 220 pounds. And I'm sure their weights aren't only what they are on 24/7 Sports. I'm sure they're up or down. You're losing Cam McCormick, who is 6'5", 6'6", big guy, 240, 250 pounds. Maliki Madavao is another one, 6'6", 265 pounds, I think was his listed weight. Those are big guys. And I think it'll all depend on what Will Stein decides to do with the offense and how he utilizes his tight ends. Because with Kenny Dillingham in that 14J personnel set, you're going to be having Ferguson and Patrick Herbert as your 2 tight ends in that set. I mean, along with Josh Connerly, which is fine. Those are bigger guys. But if one of those guys gets hurt, then it's Kenyon Sadiq or Nicholas Harbor, who I'm sure are fine blockers, but that is not exactly the physique you want on that front line. If I'm Oregon, I'm getting another transfer portal addition no matter what. You can't rely on Nicholas Harbor to commit, even if they feel good about it, because it's recruiting. This is 17, 18-year-olds making up their mind about where they want to go play college. It doesn't work like that. See Peyton Bowen signing day. Just doesn't work sometimes. So they need to get at least 1 tight end. If they land Nicholas Harbor, I'd like to see them get another tight end, because then you're no longer relying on 2 true freshmen. And I know Oregon did that just a few years ago with Ferguson and Maliki Madavao as 2 true freshmen. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't always fall. The chips don't always fall in place like they did a couple of seasons ago with those 2 guys. So if it's me, I'd like to see them get at least 4 scholarship tight ends, preferably 5, just because you're working on 2 tight ends. And I brought this up in our Slack channel the other day. With Harbor, he's clearly track and football. If he turns his attention only to track, then suddenly you're down a tight end and you don't have a necessary backup there. So I'd like to see them get 2 more scholarship guys, 1 more if you include Harbor, which is certainly not a guarantee.
Where they get that tight end is interesting. It's going to be difficult because I agree with Jared. If they add one, it has to be through the portal. But you're going to run into a situation just like with Cam McCormick here, where we don't know his whole reasoning of why he left. But I imagine it's probably because, hey, look, I want to be the dude. I want to get to the league. I need a place where I'm going to get significant targets, significant reps. I'm going to be on the field primarily as the number 1 tight end. And that wasn't going to happen at Oregon because Terrence Ferguson is coming back. So he left. Now you're going to hit the transfer portal and you're going to have to convince a guy, if that's where you go, that, hey, you're probably not going to be the number 1 option because that's Terrence Ferguson. And then on top of that, you're going to have to compete against Patrick Herbert, who looked solid at times, but is certainly someone that could be beaten out. And Kenyon Sadiq, and for now, as a freshman, maybe Nicholas Harbor joins, but it's going to be interesting to see the caliber of tight end they add, because a long-term guy, like a high-profile Power 5 multi-year starter at that position, I just don't think he's going to look at Oregon and say, that's where I want to go, because it's a loaded position group.
I don't know that.
I mean,
do they need one though? I guess is my point. My counter to that would be, and I think you're totally right, Matt, that you're not going to attract an all-conference guy who's got years of starting or a guy who even has much starting experience. You're kind of recruiting someone to be like a third or fourth player at tight end, though, from my perspective. Like maybe you get a guy in best case scenario, Dick, you get a guy who is able to contend with Ferguson for starting reps or beat Herbert out as your number 2. Or whatever the roster breaks out. But like, just to kind of put a positive spin on it, if this is the biggest concern you have on offense, you've got a pretty darn good offense.
Right.
If you're concerned about the depth at tight end, because I think they are perfectly equipped to be just fine, even if the addition from the portal is somebody who is a Hunter Kampmoyer caliber tight end, where he's like, okay, this guy's a good blocker. He can maybe catch a ball or two a game. And that's it. And you can probably find guys like that from smaller levels.
That's all you need, really.
Right? Like, that's kind of what you need. This doesn't have to be a home run portal edition. This would be a depth edition, which is why, like, it's kind of a weird spot. And, like, I'm in agreement that I think they should try to find someone who fits that. But there's also a world where I look at, like, someone like Tyler Nanny, who's just, like, a big guy. You could put him out there in a jumbo package and say, just go push a guy around. Or maybe there's a guy – like they did with Terrell Tillman this last year, who didn't end up being needed. I love giving Nans a shout out on the pod. Big fan. Or Pretty Peter Burke, our other favorite walk-on, who I'm not sure what his future is, but Pretty Peter. We've got nicknames for all these guys because we're dorks and we don't have anything else to do. But just my last point was just kind of like, you could. This doesn't have to be a home run portal edition. This is the one time where if you are going to make an addition, you can probably just go find a guy who's big, physical, who can block, and it's impressive and probably a nice positive, kind of a cherry on top if he's a good pass catcher, because the way you're looking at it, Ferguson, very much a proven pass catcher. Sadiq is a freak as an athlete. Harbor, if you land him, same thing. So you're looking for a guy basically just to fill in the blocking kind of reps, not to minimize that, but it doesn't have to be like a big-time guy who even has starting experience. You could probably take a guy who again has played at the lower level as a starter, or a guy who's been a career backup at a bigger school and be just fine, from my perspective.
And the difficult part of that, though, is you don't have any scholarships. You're already over. And
that's the bigger question.
Sure, yeah.
And now it becomes like, okay, if we're all in on that decision, is it more valuable to take him than it is to take a Roderick Pleasant or another type of transfer, maybe at the cornerback position or a safety or an edge guy? I don't know. I'm just naming positions. That's one in which I'm thankful that we're not the head coach. We don't have to make that decision. We don't have to figure out how to get down to 85 and dealing with depth. Casey Rogers, Jared, your thoughts on just what this means for Oregon and the defense that they could be starting up front now?
Yeah, I think it's important that Casey Rogers came back. I'd like to jump into Jordan Burch because I think that's the more important news here.
Sure.
But so we'll kind of just segue it into it.
Just go front. Just go talk about the front.
Yeah, I was just going to go front seven.
That's where we're at. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Rogers returning is really important to start off with, just because he was a starter the entire season last year. Him and Jordan Riley, the two transfers from Nebraska, were the starters. Him coming back, he's now in a competition to keep that starting spot. I would pencil him in now as the starter at one of the defensive tackle spots, just because I don't know what we're going to get from Popo Amavai, who also announced his return, who's coming back. Yep. He missed all of last season with a foot injury. So I think I'm just penciling in Casey Rogers just because we'll see what they eventually get from Popo. But you also have Keon Ware-Hudson in there, and Taki Taimani returns. That's some good depth. And I think Casey was one of the I don't know how to put this, one of the unsung heroes of this defensive front last year, because he was good. You talked about, we all talked about the significance of missing Popo Amavai. Well, Casey Rogers put up the same exact season that Popo Amavai did last year, which was Popo's best season. Very almost identical stats, 30-plus tackles, 3.5-plus tackles for loss. Very similar players, similar production. But this front seven gets a lot better, and specifically the defensive front gets a lot better with the return of Brandon Dorlus and the addition of Jordan Burch. Burch is a human highlight, or not a human highlight reel in college, but was one in high school. Big dude, 6'6", 265-plus pounds, can really move, big athlete. His production at South Carolina was lacking. You can go look at their message boards. They certainly indicate that it was a lacking. performance there at South Carolina over his 3 years. But again, a 5-star recruit in the country in the class of 2020. I looked it up earlier. His composite score was 9.954, which puts him as the 4th highest in Oregon's history if he eventually does come to Oregon, which he just committed. So I'm assuming he will be. It's a big move because this is what was needed. Oregon needed a pass rusher last season and just never got it other than DJ Johnson. And I think DJ Johnson is a very good comparison to the type of player that Jordan Burch is. I just think Jordan Burch is more physically gifted and just more talented overall. They're both similar body sizes at that 6'5", 6'6 and a half, 260 plus pounds. I think that they're going to play the same position. And now you get Brandon Dorlus back for another year. And now you have better pass rushers. You bring in a bunch of defensive linemen in the class of 2023, including some edge guys like Mateo Uiagalelei and Blake Purchase, who I have talked about many times in this podcast as a lover of Blake. But it's a huge, huge addition to Jordan Burch. I'm very excited for Oregon's defensive front next year. This is what they needed. And everybody who is asking, why are they taking all these defensive guys, especially defensive linemen? It's because the pass rush was non-existent last year. I talked about this again on this podcast all the time. This helps that. I don't know if we can't guarantee Jordan Burch could come in here and get 15 sacks, but he's going to be a very welcomed addition. And I think people will see that from the spring game and spring practices, just immediately how much of an impact he makes.
Well, and what was our kind of main talking point coming out of the season was, what did they need to find in the portal? Some guy on the edge, right? That was the number one need. And they went out and landed a guy who, again, I know the stats, and I don't even think the stats in 22 are particularly bad for Burch, like 60 total
They're
tackles.
actually solid.
They're really solid.
He's just a 5-star, and he was linked, or he was compared to Jadeveon Clowney coming out of high school, going to South Carolina, his home state. He just didn't put up unbelievable numbers like Brian Brzee or Miles Murphy did in that same recruiting class at Clemson. So I think it's just unfair comparisons, more or less.
Right. So, but my point is like, you went out, the big need was on the edge, and you went and brought in a guy who has the pedigree to be a major difference maker. I think Jared and Matt and I, we've been talking on Slack about just how few bodies there are that are similar to Jordan Burch out west in the Pac-12. This is just the type of athlete you don't typically see, right? Which is what made the idea of Kayvon Thibodeau and DJ Johnson, these type of huge jumbo freak athletes playing in the Pac-12 at Oregon, such a compelling, concept. And it worked out with pretty mixed, I think, results there. I mean, Kayvon, I'm not going to diminish him at all. Huge, big-time player. DJ, I think you saw by his senior season, some of it turned out. And he played, I thought, really well at times, pretty quiet at other times. Now with Jordan Burch, you've got another one of these freaks, and you just hope he can develop and play his best football. And we should note Dan Lanning recruited him when he was at Georgia. He was the primary there. They have a long-standing relationship. This was your bit, but this is, to me, by far the biggest target and an addition they've made through the portal. I think this year, and probably including maybe last year, although Bo Nix is probably hard to supplant, but certainly this year, this is the guy that you look at and go, he should be a huge difference maker and arguably the team's best defensive player day one when he steps on campus. Like, he has that kind of an upset, and you sure hope he does. And then just kind of the general way this is played out. I don't know, Matt, did you have anything on Burch you wanted to add before we just talk big picture D-line, or kind of where?
I just felt like I needed to clarify. I called him a 5-star transfer, and yes, he was a 5-star in high school, but he's a 4-star transfer after his college career, which takes into account what he did previously. So his score is a 9.400 as a transfer, but he is a top 10 player in the transfer portal this season. And that's not like just best available. That's overall everybody. Top 10 player at the transfer portal. 4-star, 9 transfers now total for Oregon. It's going to be kind of segues into just the big picture stuff here.
Yeah.
But 9 total transfers. We're still waiting on evals for Evan Williams and Connor Soeli or Sol. Tez Johnson did get a 3-star ranking. 0.88, improved his rating by about 5 from coming out of high school. But you just look at, I think, the group of guys that they've landed. Burch is very productive, maybe the most important guy they've added. to this team. Evan Williams is an all-conference safety from the Mountain West. Tez Johnson is an all-conference player from Sun Belt. That's what Troy plays in. A solid conference there. The best maybe offensive tackle in the country, and Johnny Cornelius. And then they added a starter receiver from Alabama and Trayshawn Holden, or part-time starter. Justin Jacobs was a starter for Iowa before he got hurt. Just big picture-wise, this defense in particular is going to look entirely different. I think Burch starts. I think Evan Williams is probably going to be starting. I think Justin Jacobs is probably going to be starting. And you've also got Kyrie Jackson, who I don't know if you can definitively say he'll start, but there's also a really good chance he's starting as well for Oregon, which, 4 or 5 guys, new transfer portal guys starting for Oregon next season, most likely.
And if you want to look at it, I know it's not exactly this way, but you want to look at the 4 biggest losses they had to graduation or early entry to the NFL draft in Noah Sewell's case. They've now gone out and addressed each of those specific players basically in the portal, right? Jordan Burch is your DJ Johnson replacement. Justin Jacobs replaces Noah Sewell. Kyrie Jackson replaces Christian Gonzalez. Evan Williams kind of replaces his brother Bennett. And I'm not going to – we had a question earlier this week. Are they upgrading at every spot? I think it's far too early to tell, and I am skeptical they're upgrading at corner and maybe a little less skeptical, but not sure they're upgrading at linebacker. But I think Bennett and Evan are pretty similar players, and then Jordan Burch and, as you said earlier, Jared, DJ Johnson are similar caliber of athletes, but Burch has the higher pedigree and again, go watch this guy move around for a game, even if he's not quote unquote making play after play after play on the highlight reel. He's an incredible athlete for someone his size, right? DJ, we talked for so many years, and I think he was on Bruce Feldman's preseason top 100, freaks list. I don't know if Feldman had Burch on his most recent list or not, but
I'll go look it up.
Yeah, maybe that's worth checking out. But he's certainly in that same ilk of just guy is just big, athletic, moves really, really well. And again, the pass rush stats there he doesn't have a career 28 sacks coming in. Like he has not been that kind of a productive player. But you can see the upside for why he could be someone like that. So I continue to be, I won't say overly concerned. I don't think this defense is going to be like the worst in the conference, because the defense wasn't the worst in the conference this year, despite having major holes. But I think you feel pretty darn good about the way they've addressed the positions that they needed to. Getting an edge rusher of this caliber is a huge start, I think, in terms of kind of fixing your pass rush.
Jordan Burch was not on Bruce Feldman's 2022 freaks list, unfortunately. I think when Oregon fans are going to see him play, and including us eventually at practices, I think we're all going to come away that he's a freak. I think, moreover, like Erik mentioned, Oregon bringing DJ Johnson in the first place was looked at like there are not a lot of guys in this conference that are his size and his caliber of player. And Jordan Burch is the exact same guy. I expect him to be similar to what I think we all kind of think Trayshawn Holden will be, a guy moving from the SEC to the Pac-12, where I know this may sound mean to Pac-12 fans, but the competition just isn't the same. The better teams in the SEC are better than the best teams in the Pac-12, as we saw in the national championship game the other night, and that blowout. Jordan Burch is going to have plenty of opportunities to rush the passer this year. And I think Oregon's really going to benefit from that just because of his pure size and strength, going against guys who just might not be rated or just might not be as much of an NFL draft prospect as they are in the SEC. I'm very excited to watch him play. When we caught wind of this potentially happening, I did a deep dive into what he looks like on the film and on the field, and he's good. I really like what he could bring to this defensive front. I know that's very oversimplifying. I'm just saying, this guy's pretty good.
It's good. Analysis over.
Analysis over. I watched 3 seconds of film and declared he's good. But really, you could watch 15 seconds of film and be like, okay, this guy has something special here. Oregon's defensive front is going to need, or their defensive coaching staff, specifically Tosh Lupoy, they're just going to need to coach him up some more. I think that's going to be it. But Tosh Lupoy is a guy who I know many people were the biggest fans of towards the end of the season. This is an NFL defensive line coach for the past couple of seasons. This is a guy who's been heralded as a edge whisperer, quote unquote, somebody who really helps defensive linemen get off the line of scrimmage, develop moves. I think this is a really good situation for him, for Jordan Burch to be brought into, to be coached up by Tosh and by Dan Lanning. I think this is the biggest add. We talked about this over the offseason, where there weren't a lot of really good defensive line prospects in the portal for a while. Yeah. Bowl games happened. Here they are. You saw Jordan Burch commit, and then Anthony Lucas just committed to USC, another guy who's top tier talent who transferred away from Texas A&M. Dan Lanning and company, they played the waiting game and they won out. So I think that gives credit to them. They're seemingly doing the same thing they were last year and only adding instant impact guys.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Oregon continues to monitor the transfer portal. There's about 3.5 days left for the window for guys to enter that portal and look for new homes. And then it goes into...
Is it the 12th?
18th?
It's 18th.
We're all off. It's the 18th.
I thought it was the 18th. But
there's about a week.
Wrong. Yeah.
There's about a week. I think you're right. I think it's the 18th. I think the 15th is the last weekend that transfers can take visits. That's where I think I'm getting mixed up there. But nonetheless, less than a handful of days left. And seeing where this group goes next is interesting because they still have holes to fill and they still got to get down to 85. I think that's going to be the biggest question for me is going into signing day on February 1st, how they get down to 85. And I don't think we'll know that answer by that date. That's just a guess. I don't think they have to be technically, on that date. So it's going to be a couple weeks, couple months type process. We'll have more coverage on duckterritory.com about the addition of Jordan Burch. We've already got something up. Erik did it on Casey Rogers returning. Cam McCormick as well is gone. We have something up there as well. So I highly encourage you guys to go to check out duckterritory.com. But until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.